My mother announced my engagement to a room full of strangers, before I had even agreed to go on a second date with the man standing beside her. She did it with one hand on my shoulder and the other wrapped around a champagne flute, smiling like she had just given me a gift. "Our June is finally coming home to her real family," she said, and the guests at the country club clapped as if love had happened right in front of them instead of a trap. I was 31 years old, standing under a chandelier in a borrowed navy dress, with buttercream still under one fingernail from the cake I had finished at 5 that morning. My parents had told me the brunch was for my father's new scholarship fund. They said they needed one cake, 1 hour, and my face in a few photos. I should have known better. With my parents, 1 hour usually meant they had already sold my whole day to someone else and expected me to smile when I found out. The man beside me was named Brent Ashford. He was a real estate developer, divorced, and too comfortable with my mother's hand guiding him closer to me. I had met him once at my parents' 4th of July party, where he asked if my bakery was adorable or profitable. Now he leaned down and said, "Guess we're skipping the awkward part." He thought he was being charming. My father laughed loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. I did not laugh. I looked at my mother and said, quietly, "Take your hand off me." Her smile stayed fixed, but her fingers dug through the fabric at my shoulder. That was my first warning. The second came from my father, who stepped in front of the little podium and lifted both palms like a mayor calming a crowd. He was not a mayor, but he had practiced that pose for years. "June is overwhelmed," he said. "Big emotions. Big day. She gets that from my side." People chuckled. A woman in pearls tilted her head at me with pity, as if I had made a scene by standing still. My parents had built a whole language around moments like that. If I objected, I was overwhelmed. If I remembered something differently, I was sensitive. If I said no, I was confused. The words changed, but the message never did. Their version of me always got to the room before I did. What made that morning different was the email on my phone. It had arrived while I was piping sugared lemons onto my father's cake. The subject line was still glowing in my mind. Final offer. Kitchen residency, Seattle. 6 months of subsidized commercial kitchen space. A tiny storefront after that, if I could make the numbers work. I had applied without telling my parents because I already knew what they would do with a dream that did not include them. They would call it selfish until I handed it over. My father reached for me after the clapping faded. "Come here, kiddo," he said, still using the nickname he saved for audiences. He kissed the air near my temple and spoke through his teeth. "You will not embarrass your mother today." "I'm not engaged," I said. His smile tightened. "No one said engaged." "She did." "She said family," he murmured. "Don't be dramatic." Across the room, my mother was already accepting congratulations. She had Brent's mother by both hands. She was telling a story with her eyes wet, the way she did when she wanted people to feel lucky to witness her. I caught one phrase as it floated past the flowers on the buffet table. "After everything we sacrificed to get her stable." Stable. That word hit harder than the fake announcement. It was one of her old locks. She used it when she wanted people to see me as a rescued problem, not a grown woman with rent, clients, taxes, and a life she could not enter without knocking. I stepped away from my father and went behind the cake table because my hands needed something real to do. The cake was 4 tiers, lemon and elderflower, with a thin sugar ribbon around each layer. My father had asked for something modest, then sent me a photo of a royal wedding cake and said donors notice details. I had paid for the edible gold myself because he had forgotten to reimburse me, and because a part of me still thought perfection might buy peace. That part of me was tired, but it was not dead yet. Brent followed me. He picked up one of the sugar lemons from the extra tray and popped it in his mouth without asking. "Your mom said you're thinking about relocating," he said. "That's brave. But honestly, there's a lot you could do here if you had the right guidance." I looked at the empty spot on the tray where the lemon had been. That was decoration. He chewed. "It's good. It took 40 minutes to make." He smiled with his mouth closed, like I was adorable for caring. "I'm sure your dad will cover it." That was when I understood Brent had not misunderstood anything. He knew my parents had offered me up. Maybe not as a fiancé, not exactly, but as something adjacent. A useful daughter. A local woman with a business that made him look warm. A person my parents could place beside him in photos while they built another story about how generous, connected, and beloved the Mercers were. My phone buzzed on the table under my folded apron. I glanced down. It was a reminder I had set for myself. Reply to residency by noon tomorrow. Under it sat a text from my landlord. If you're renewing, I need your answer before close of business tomorrow. 2 deadlines, both quiet and real, waiting underneath the circus my parents had built around me. I wiped my hands on a napkin and picked up the phone. My mother saw the movement from across the room. She cut through the guests fast, still smiling, her heels silent on the carpet. "June, sweetheart," she said, and that one word told me she was angry. "Not now. I need 5 minutes. You need to be present. I need to answer something about my lease." Her eyes flicked to Brent, then to the women pretending not to listen. "We'll discuss your little apartment later. It's my home, for now," she said, softly enough that only I heard it. Then she leaned in and kissed my cheek, hard and dry. To everyone else, it looked tender. Into my ear she whispered, "Do not make me explain your moods to these people." I pulled back. For 1 second, I almost said everything. I almost told her the Seattle residency was real. I almost told my father I had built my bakery without his wisdom, without his contacts, without the family name he treated like oxygen. But I had learned the danger of giving my parents fresh facts while they still had an audience. Facts became props in their hands. Pain became a speech. Plans became something they could bless, belittle, or steal. So I said the smallest true thing I could manage. "I'm leaving after I serve the cake." My mother stared at me as if I had slapped her. Then she turned her head slightly, and my father appeared at her side. He always seemed to know when she needed him to become large in a room. He placed one hand on the back of my neck, not squeezing, just claiming the space there. "June," he said, "walk with me." I did not move. His hand stayed on my neck. The room kept humming around us. Forks touched plates. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. My own heartbeat thudded against the bones under his palm. Then a small voice behind me said, "Excuse me, are these the scholarship forms?" I turned. A teenage girl stood at the cake table in a thrifted blazer, holding a folder against her chest. She had come for the reason printed on the invitation, not the show my parents had made. Her name tag said Lila. She looked from my father's hand to my face, then quickly down at the table, embarrassed to have seen anything real. My father removed his hand. That tiny movement changed the air for me. Not because Lila saved me. She didn't. She only saw what my parents had worked so hard to hide, and for the first time that morning, I stopped helping them hide it. Lila was still holding her scholarship folder when my mother smiled at her like the girl had walked in on a stain. I saw Lila's fingers tighten around the paper, and something in me shifted before I had time to make it sound brave. My father's hand was no longer on my neck, but I could still feel the heat of it there. Brent was behind me, close enough that his cologne cut through the lemon and elderflower, and my mother had already turned her face back toward the dining room as if nothing ugly had happened. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said to Lila, using that sweet public voice that always meant danger. "The scholarship table is near the front. June is having a family moment right now." Lila looked at me instead of my mother. She was maybe 17, with a blazer that didn't quite fit and shoes polished so hard the toes looked thin. "They told me to bring these to you," she said. "The email said you were helping with the applications." That one sentence embarrassed my mother more than any accusation could have, not because it exposed a lie, because it named the event she had buried under flowers, champagne, and my fake engagement. The brunch was supposed to be for students like Lila. My cake had been ordered for the scholarship fund. My parents had turned it into a stage for themselves. "I am helping," I said, and I took the folder from Lila before my mother could touch it. "Give me 2 minutes." My father laughed too loudly. "June has a generous heart. That's what we love about her. But today is not a work day." "It is for me," I said. My voice came out quieter than I wanted, but it carried. A few people near the coffee urn turned their heads. I reached for the cake cart and pulled it toward the ballroom doors. The wheels wobbled over the carpet seam, and for one awful second the 4 tiers leaned. My whole body went cold. Then the cake settled. I kept moving. Serving that cake became the only safe thing I could do. Not safe emotionally. Safe because my hands knew what to do when my family made the room unreal. I rolled the cart to the center table, set the silver knife beside the plates, and checked the border where the gold leaf met the buttercream. My mother followed me with her smile fixed in place. My father moved to the microphone. Brent stood near the donors, already accepting congratulations like he had closed on me. Dad tapped the mic. Before dessert, we have one more joyful announcement. I looked at Lila. She had stopped near the doorway, half in and half out, like she was deciding whether rich people were allowed to change the rules after you arrived. I thought about myself at her age, standing in rooms where adults praised me when I was useful and punished me when I was inconvenient. I picked up the cake knife. "No," I said. The microphone caught it. Not loud. Just enough. A small, clean word, brighter than the clink of glasses. My father turned slowly. "June." I cut into the bottom tier. The knife slid through lemon sponge and cream, and the first slice came out perfect. I placed it on a plate and handed it to Lila. "The first piece goes to the scholarship applicants," I said. That was the event. For a second, nobody moved. Then an older woman in a navy suit, one of the actual committee members, stepped forward and took a plate from the stack. "She's right," the woman said. "That is the event." I didn't know her well. I only knew she had once picked up a box of pastries from my bakery and asked the names of every apprentice in my kitchen. In that room, her simple agreement had more weight than my anger. Other people began to move toward the cake table, relieved to follow a new script. I cut and plated fast. Slice, plate, napkin. Slice, plate, napkin. My mother leaned close enough that her pearls touched my shoulder. "You are making yourself look unstable," she whispered. I kept my eyes on the cake. "Then stop standing next to me." She inhaled sharply, but she stepped back because people were watching the cake now, not her. That was the first mercy of the day. My work took up space. My hands gave the room something honest to do. Brent came to the table after I had served half the bottom tier. He didn't take a plate. He rested both hands on the linen and bent toward me like we were sharing a private joke. "You know this doesn't change anything," he said. "Your parents and I already talked through the next step." That was the first time anyone said it plainly. Not an engagement, a next step. A phrase with no ring, no proposal, no question inside it. Just movement arranged by other people. "What next step?" I asked. Brent gave me a patient smile. "The building on Holman. Your father said you were ready for a serious location if someone helped you think bigger." The room tilted in a different way. Holman was a storefront I had toured once and rejected because the rent was reckless and the landlord wanted a personal guarantee. I had told my father about it months before, back when I still forgot that information became a tool in his hands. Brent was not talking about marrying me because he loved me. He was talking about installing me in a storefront that would tie my bakery, my debt, and my name to him. "My bakery is not part of your project," I said. His smile thinned. "June, don't be childish." I heard a tiny sound behind him. Lila had set her plate down without eating. Her face had changed. She looked less frightened now and more angry, but not in a dramatic way, in a practical way, like she had just learned where the exits were. My father came off the microphone and reached us before Brent could say more. "Enough," Dad said, still smiling for the room. "June is emotional. Big days do that." "No," I said again, and this time I did not lower my voice. "I'm working. You're interrupting me." That landed differently from any speech I could have given. It did not ask them to admit anything. It did not beg the room to believe me. It named the visible fact. I had a knife in my hand, cake on the plates, applicants waiting, and my father blocking the table. The woman in the navy suit touched my father's sleeve. "Howard. Let her finish service." My father's jaw moved once. He hated being corrected by someone he wanted to impress, but he stepped aside. I kept cutting. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Brent. I served every scholarship applicant first, then the committee, then the donors who had just watched my parents lose control of their own stage. When the top tier was all that remained, I boxed it instead of cutting it. My mother saw and snapped. "That is for the family table." "It's paid for," I said, "by me." I carried the box to the kitchen myself. In the service hallway, the noise of the ballroom dropped behind the door, and my knees almost gave out. The kitchen staff pretended not to stare. I set the cake box on a metal prep table and pressed both palms against the cold edge until my breathing steadied. Lila came through the swinging door a few seconds later. "I'm sorry," she said. That nearly broke me. Not my mother's whisper. Not Brent's plan. Not my father's hand. A teenage girl apologizing for standing in the wrong doorway. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. My mom said people like them give money, so people like us have to smile, Lila said. But you didn't. I wanted to tell her I had smiled for 31 years. I wanted to tell her I had built a whole bakery out of smiling while angry. Instead, I washed my hands at the prep sink because buttercream was under my nails, and I needed one normal action. Find the woman in the navy suit, I said. Give her your forms directly. If anyone stops you, tell her June Mercer told you to ask why the scholarship table was left unattended. Lila nodded. Then she took the uneaten slice from her plate, broke off one bite with her fingers, and tasted it like she needed to prove the day had not ruined everything. It's really good, she said. I laughed once, and it came out rough. Thank you. After she left, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. I thought it would be my mother. It was not. It was the Seattle residency director, a woman named Mara, calling 2 days before I owed her an answer. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then it lit again immediately. I answered before I could lose my nerve. This is June. Mara did not waste time. I know you asked for until Monday, she said. But our alternate just accepted another placement. I need to know tonight if you're coming to Seattle. Behind me, the ballroom door opened, and my father's voice filled the service hall. June, we are not finished. I looked at the box top tier on the prep table, the one piece of the cake my family had not managed to serve themselves, and I said into the phone, I need 10 minutes. Mara was still on the phone when my mother followed me into the service hallway and mouthed, hang up, like Seattle was a prank call. I held the phone tighter and stepped behind a rack of clean coffee cups, with frosting on my wrist and my heart knocking so hard I could hear it under Mara's voice. Behind the ballroom doors, people were still clapping in that confused country club way, polite because they did not know which version of the afternoon they were supposed to believe. June? Mara said. I need a real answer. My mother reached for my elbow. I moved before she touched me. Not dramatically, just one clean step back. Yes, I said into the phone. My voice came out thin, but it came out. I accept. For 1 second, the hallway went sharp and silent. The kitchen printer clicked. A dishwasher laughed at something far away. My mother stared at me as if I had slapped her in front of the whole club, even though the whole club was on the other side of 2 swinging doors. Mara exhaled, soft and relieved. Good. I'll send the formal packet tonight. Can you be in Seattle for orientation on the 1st? Yes, I said again, before I could make room for fear. I can, my mother whispered. You cannot possibly mean that. Mara must have heard something because her tone changed. Are you safe to talk? That question almost undid me. Not because I was in danger the way people mean danger on forms. Because nobody in my family had ever asked if I was safe to choose. I looked at my mother's hand, still lifted like she owned the space between us. I'm safe, I said. I'll call you back from my shop. Tonight, Mara said. Don't wait. When I ended the call, my mother's face had already rearranged itself. The panic vanished. The smile returned. That was her gift. She could put on warmth like lipstick. Honey, she said, gently enough for any passing server to hear. You're exhausted. You've had an emotional reaction to a very generous day. No, I said. I had a phone call. You had a scene, she said, still smiling. And now you are making it worse. The old me would have explained. I would have told her the residency was real, that I had applied months ago, that I had not told them because every dream I named out loud became family property. I would have begged her to understand the difference between rescue and control, but I had just given Mara my answer, and it had used up the part of me that still performed for my mother. I need my cake stand, I said. Her smile flickered. That is what you want to talk about? It's mine. June. People are asking questions. Then answer them honestly. She gave a small laugh, the kind she used when she wanted strangers to think I was fragile. Honestly, your father and I have spent years making sure you had a place in this town. We gave you introductions. We brought you clients. We saved that little storefront when you were too proud to admit you needed help. You didn't save it, I said. You gave people the impression you owned it. Her eyes hardened. There she was. Not the mother with the soft voice, the one underneath. Lower your voice. I almost smiled, because for the first time that afternoon, I was not the one who sounded afraid. I stepped around her and pushed into the service area behind the ballroom. The kitchen smelled like coffee, hot butter, and wet linen. 2 banquet servers were scraping plates. Lila stood near the prep table, with her scholarship folder clutched against her chest, looking too young to be in the middle of adult theater, and too smart to pretend she had not understood every word. "You okay?" she asked. My mother came in behind me before I could answer. "Lila, sweetheart, the brunch is moving back into program mode. Why don't you go sit with the other students?" Lila did not move. She looked at me, not my mother. That tiny choice felt bigger than applause. "Mrs. Mercer told us there were only donor tables," Lila said quietly. "But the invitation said applicants could meet mentors after dessert." My mother's chin lifted. "There was a timing issue." "No," Lila said. Her voice shook, but she kept it level. "There were place cards for us in a box by the coat room. Someone never put them out." My mother turned very still. It was not a public accusation. It was worse for her. It was a plain sentence from a girl she had counted on being grateful and silent. I looked at Lila's folder, then at the smear of raspberry filling on my own apron, and understood that my mother had not only hijacked my cake, she had tucked away the students too. The entire room had been arranged to make my parents look generous without having to share the center of it. "Thank you," I said to Lila. My mother snapped her eyes back to me. "Do not encourage this." "She's not confused," I said. "She read the room better than I did." Lila's mouth tightened like she was trying not to cry. "I can put the cards out now," my mother said. "Absolutely not." I reached for the box beside the coat-room door before I could think it into something complicated. It was sitting under a stack of folded programs, exactly where Lila had said. I lifted the lid and saw 20 white cards, with names written in blue ink. Students. Mentors. Real people waiting behind my parents' performance. I took the top handful and gave them to Lila. "Put them out," my mother grabbed my wrist. Not hard enough to bruise. Hard enough to remind me that she still believed force counted if she kept it elegant. "June." A banquet cook looked over. So did one of the servers. My mother released me at once. That small release told me more than any apology could have. She knew what her hand looked like when other people saw it. She had always known. She just counted on me being alone. I carried the rest of the place cards into the ballroom. No one gasped. No one shouted. But the donors at the front tables shifted in their seats, and the students near the back sat up straighter as Lila began setting names where names should have been all along. My father stood near the podium with Brent, both of them wearing the same stiff smile, like men waiting for a photographer after bad news. Howard caught my eye and walked toward me. He did not rush. My father never rushed when he wanted to look innocent. "June," he said low enough to keep the room out of it. "We need a family minute." "No," I said. "You need a quiet minute, those are different." Brent stepped in with his hands open. He had the expression of a man trying to calm a skittish horse, and I hated that expression more than anything he had said out loud. "I think everyone got a little surprised today." "You were not surprised," I said. He glanced at my father. That glance was fast, but it landed. Howard's jaw tightened. Brent recovered first. "Your dad and I discussed possibilities, that's all. The Holman building has a beautiful corner space. Your brand could grow there. A bigger kitchen, better foot traffic, real backing." "My brand," I repeated. "Our family name," my father said, as if correcting a child's homework. "Mercer means something here." "It means something to you," I said. "It means security," he said. "It means you don't run off because some woman in Seattle flatters you." Lila passed behind him with a stack of place cards, and one of the students smiled at her like she had been waiting all afternoon to be seen. That smile steadied me more than anger could. Brent leaned closer. "Your lease is up, you know that. This solves it." There it was, spoken like a favor. Not a proposal. Not romance. A trap with granite countertops and my last name on the awning. I picked up the box top tier from the side table. My father looked at it as if I had lifted a family heirloom. "Leave that," he said. "No," I said. "This one is going with me." Brent gave a short, embarrassed laugh. "June, come on. It's cake." I looked at him then, really looked. The polished shoes, the easy entitlement, the confidence that everything handmade could be bought if you stood close enough to a man like my father. "That's why you don't get it," I said. I walked out through the service doors with the cake box balanced against my ribs and my phone buzzing in my apron pocket. I did not check it until I reached the loading area behind the club. The air outside smelled like cut grass and fryer oil. The message was from my landlord, Mrs. Alvarez. Need your renewal decision before close of business tomorrow. For the first time all day, the choice was not hidden inside my parents' voices. It was standing in front of me, plain and timed. Seattle had said yes. My lease was asking now. Behind me, the ballroom doors opened, and my father called my name like he still expected the sound of it to turn me around. When I got back to my bakery, a gold sign I had never ordered was leaning against my front door with my last name and Brent's last name printed together like a verdict. Under it, in smaller letters, it said, "Tomorrow's private preview." My hands were still wrapped around the box top tier from the brunch, and for 1 second, I just stood on the sidewalk with cake frosting cooling against my palms, while my own shop looked like it had been borrowed for someone else's future. The front lights were on. I had not turned them on. Through the glass, I could see my assistant, Tess, standing behind the counter with both hands on her hips, while a woman in black pants folded ivory napkins across my pastry case. My case was supposed to hold morning croissants, lemon bars, and the little brown butter cakes people bought on their lunch breaks. Now half the trays were stacked on the floor, and a silver rental vase sat where my cash box usually went. I unlocked the door so hard, the bell above it hit the frame twice. Tess looked up and said, "Please tell me you knew about this." The woman with the napkins smiled, like I was late to my own appointment. "We were told to set for 12. I set the cake box on the counter and said, "By who?" She blinked, and that tiny pause told me enough before she said Brent's name. I did not yell. That surprised me more than it surprised anyone else. I walked behind the counter, lifted the rental vase, and placed it on the floor by the door. "Pack everything you brought," I told the woman. "This is a working bakery, not a showroom." She looked toward Tess, then back at me. "Mr. Ashford said the family approved it." I felt my father in that sentence, even though his name was not in it. The family. That soft little word they used when they meant everyone except me. Tess grabbed a stack of napkins and pushed them into the woman's open crate. "You heard her," Tess said. "We open at 6. The decorator left angry, but she left. Her van pulled away with the gold sign still lying face up on the sidewalk, catching the last light like a plaque for a person who had died. I brought it inside and turned it toward the wall. Then I saw what else had changed. Someone had moved my mixer away from the prep table, only a few inches, but enough that the floor scrape showed pale against the worn tile. Someone had been measuring. Someone had looked at the bakery and seen not flour and habit and 5 years of my life, but square footage. Tess followed my eyes and said, quieter, "A man came with Brent. He had one of those laser things. He said you were expanding." My phone buzzed again in my apron pocket. I did not look. If it was Brent, I knew his first sentence. If it was my father, I knew his tone. I was tired of being handled in advance. Tess waited while I put the mixer back where it belonged. The machine was heavy enough that my shoulder complained, but I needed to feel the weight. I needed one thing in that room to move because I moved it. When it settled into the old mark on the tile, Tess said, "June, are we closing?" That question did what my father's threats had not done. It took the air out of me. Tess had a son in daycare and a mother whose rent she helped pay. She had never asked me for more than a fair schedule and an honest answer. I leaned against the prep table and gave her the only one I had. I accepted the Seattle residency. Tess's face changed, but she did not make it about betrayal. She looked around the bakery like she was measuring loss a different way. "Okay," she said. "Then what happens to this place?" I almost said, "I don't know." Instead I said, "No one gets to take it tonight." Before Tess could answer, someone knocked at the back door. Not the hard knock of my father or the polished little tap my mother used when she wanted a witness. This was quick and nervous. Tess opened it, and Lila stood in the alley with her scholarship folder pressed to her chest and 2 other students behind her. One of the girls had been crying. The boy with them held a suit jacket over his arm like it belonged to someone older. Lila looked embarrassed to be there. "I'm sorry," she said. The brunch ended weird. The committee lady told us to wait for rides, but the lobby got crowded, and your mom kept asking people to take photos near the flowers. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "You said this was your bakery. I didn't know where else to go." For a moment, my mother's party followed them into the room without being there. I could picture her smile tightening as the day slipped out of her hands. I could picture my father deciding the students were a staffing problem, not people. Then I looked at the cake box on my counter. The top tier was still tied with the white ribbon from the brunch, It had been meant for a family celebration that was never mine. I untied it and lifted the lid. "Sit down," I told them. "Tess, grab forks." Lila stared. "We can't pay for—" "Good," I said. "Then I don't have to ring it up." Tess brought paper plates, and I cut the first slice right through the perfect sugared flowers my mother had insisted on. The knife made a soft drag through buttercream, and something in my chest loosened. We ate cake at the prep table because the front tables were still pushed crooked from the fake preview. The students were careful at first, like one wrong crumb would get them sent out. Then the boy laughed at something Tess said about the frosting being richer than most people's retirement accounts, and the room changed just enough to let us breathe. Not enough to fix anything. Enough to make the bakery sound like itself again. Lila sat beside the flour bins with her folder on her knees. "Miss, Carver said my application is complete," she said. "She said she'll call me tomorrow." She tried to say it like a fact, but hope kept breaking through. I swallowed a bite of cake and said, "Then tomorrow matters." Lila nodded. "For you too?" I looked at the crooked gold sign turned toward the wall. "Yes," I said. "For me too." The bell over the front door rang, and Mrs. Alvarez stepped in from the sidewalk with her gray cardigan buttoned wrong. She owned the building, lived above the vacant tailor shop next door, and had once threatened to raise my rent if I kept leaving almond sacks in the shared hallway. She was also the person who had texted me about the renewal. Her eyes moved from the students to the half-packed rental crates, to the gold sign hiding badly in the corner. "That explains the man with the measuring tool," she said. My stomach dropped. "He came here too?" She nodded once. "This morning. With your father." The bakery went still around me. Mrs. Alvarez did not soften it. "Howard told me you were moving on and that he wanted a smooth transition. I told him I do business with my tenant, not her parent." The students pretended not to listen, which somehow made it worse. Tess stopped with a fork in her hand. Mrs. Alvarez came closer and lowered her voice, but not enough to turn the moment private. "I need your answer tomorrow, because I have repairs to schedule and another offer waiting. That part is real. But I will not hand this place to a man who talks about you like you're a hallway he can walk through." My throat tightened in a way I did not trust, so I nodded instead of speaking. She touched the edge of the cake box. "Decide what you want, June. Not what will punish them, not what will comfort them. What you can live inside." After she left, nobody rushed to fill the silence. That was a mercy. Tess started putting the pastry trays back into the case. Lila and the other students carried chairs where they belonged. I slid the gold sign behind the trash bins, not because I was done with Brent or my father, but because I could not stand looking at their version of my name while other people were helping me save the room they had tried to claim. By the time the bakery looked like a bakery again, the windows were dark and our reflections hovered over the glass. Then headlights turned into the alley. A car door shut. I knew the sound of Brent's dress shoes before I saw him step into the back light with my spare key in his hand. Brent smiled at me from my own back doorway with my spare key pinched between two fingers, like he had found it under a couch cushion instead of using it to walk into my life. For 1 second, nobody moved. The bakery hummed around us, ovens cooling, mixer back in place, that horrible gold sign still propped near the front counter, with my name tied to his. Tess stood beside the prep table with both hands flat on the flour-dusted wood. I could see her breathing hard through her nose, trying not to be the first one to speak. "Give me the key," I said. Brent's smile got smaller, but it stayed on. "June, don't make this weird. Your dad asked me to get ahead of tomorrow. You were at the brunch. You know how these things work." "No," I said. "I know how locks work." He glanced past me at Tess, then at Mrs. Alvarez, who had come back in from the front with her coat still on and her purse tucked tight under one arm. That seemed to surprise him. He had expected me alone, or close enough to alone that he could call it a misunderstanding. The bakery suddenly felt too bright. Every scratch on the stainless table, every bag of flour stacked against the wall, every inch he had measured without asking, looked like it had become a witness. Brent slipped the key into his palm. "We're all tired. Your mother said you got emotional today." Tess made a sound like she had swallowed a match. I stepped between Brent and the prep table. "My mother is not on the lease. My father is not on the lease. You are not on the lease. Give me the key." He looked at Mrs. Alvarez then, trying to shift the room away from me. "I'm sorry you got pulled into a family conversation." Mrs. Alvarez did not soften. She was a small woman with silver hair pinned at the back of her neck, but in that moment she looked like she had been carved into the doorway. "This is my building," she said. "When someone enters after hours with an unauthorized key, it is not a family conversation." That sentence did more than my anger had. Brent's face changed. Not a lot. Just enough. His charm had been built for brunch tables, donors, hotel lobbies, rooms where people wanted the performance to continue. It did not know what to do with a landlord who had keys of her own, and no interest in being impressed. He held up one hand. "Fine. Poor choice. I should have waited." Then he pointed toward the front. "But the preview is real. People are coming tonight. Vendors, investors, your father's friends from the Arts Council. They've moved their schedules for this. If June walks away from the renewal and Seattle takes her, someone needs to keep the doors open." The words hit Tess before they hit me. I saw it in her shoulders. Until that second, Tess had been angry on my behalf. Now the floor opened under her too. She had rent. She had a mother whose prescriptions she picked up every Thursday. She had built this place with me in the hours nobody photographed. Brent knew exactly where to press. Not at my pride this time. At the people I might leave exposed if I chose myself. He turned to Tess with a gentler voice. "You'd have a position. Better pay once the expansion stabilizes. Less chaos. June can go do her artist thing. Everybody wins." Tess stared at him as if he had offered her a clean apron after tracking mud across the kitchen. "You don't even know what I do here." "I know enough," Brent said. "No," Tess said. "You know where the mixer is because you moved it. You know where the breaker box is because somebody showed you. You don't know Mrs. Hahn likes the sesame loaf sliced thin because her hands hurt. You don't know which oven lies by 15 degrees. You don't know that the front case fogs if the left door isn't kicked shut. You don't know this place. You know the square footage." I had never heard Tess speak to anyone in that tone. She was not loud. She was worse than loud. She was exact. Brent's jaw tightened, and for the first time that night I saw the thing underneath him. Not confidence. Not business sense. Hunger. He wanted the bakery because it already had a heartbeat, and he wanted to put his name on the pulse. Mrs. Alvarez moved toward the counter and lifted the gold sign with 2 fingers. She read it once, without expression, then set it face down. "Who approved this?" Brent looked at me. "The family did." "Mrs. Alvarez nodded once, slowly, as if he had given the answer she expected and disliked. "Then the family can put it in their own building." The smallest laugh escaped Tess. It was gone almost instantly, but it cracked the room open enough for me to breathe. I reached toward Brent again. This time I did not raise my voice. "Key." For a moment, I thought he would refuse. I thought he might shove it back into his pocket and dare me to make a scene. Instead, he tossed it onto the prep table. It skidded through a streak of flour and stopped beside the bench scraper. That little careless throw made me angrier than the key itself. He still believed everything here was something he could drop and pick up later. I picked up the key and placed it in Mrs. Alvarez's hand. "Can you change the locks tonight?" Brent gave a short laugh. "You can't be serious." Mrs. Alvarez closed her fist around the key. "My nephew owes me a favor." The bakery phone rang before anyone could answer. Not my cell. The old wall phone by the office, the one that only vendors, regulars, and people who had known me for years still used. The sound cut through the room with its ugly, stubborn bell. Tess looked at me. I looked at the clock. Too late for a normal order. I picked it up. June's. For half a second there was only restaurant noise, silverware, and voices. Then my mother said, "Darling, put me on speaker." My hand tightened around the receiver. No. Her pause was tiny. Anyone else might have missed it. I heard the anger slide behind her teeth. "Your father is here with Brent's guests. They were told they could stop by tonight instead of tomorrow. We're smoothing over the confusion." I looked through the front window. The street outside was dark except for the neon from the laundromat and the reflection of our pastry case. No cars yet, no faces at the glass. But my mother was already moving people toward me. She did not need a key if she could bring an audience. "There is no preview," I said. "June," she said, softer now, which was never a good sign. "Do not embarrass yourself in front of people who have only tried to help you." Brent watched me while I listened. His confidence was coming back. He had lost the key, but he still had the room outside this room. My parents had always been best at turning a private boundary into something that looked rude in public. If I locked the door, I was unstable. If I opened it, they owned the frame. I hung up without saying goodbye. The silence after that ring felt different. It was not empty, it was counting down. Tess wiped her palms on her apron. Mrs. Alvarez slid the key into her purse and looked at me with the stern patience of someone who was willing to help, but would not decide my life for me. Brent straightened his jacket. You just made this harder than it needed to be. No, I said. You did. He looked toward the front door, then back at me. They'll be here in 10 minutes. That was when Lila appeared outside the glass, breathless, one hand holding her coat closed and the other raised like she was afraid to knock too hard. Behind her, on the sidewalk, stood 2 girls from the scholarship brunch, and 1 boy I recognized from the coat room, all of them carrying plain cardboard boxes from the hotel. Not cameras, not signs. Boxes. Lila's face was pale, but her eyes were steady. Tess whispered, June. I went to the front and unlocked the door before Brent could move. Cold air rushed in around Lila's ankles. She stepped inside and looked from me to the gold sign lying face down on the counter, then to Brent standing in the kitchen doorway. We brought back what they forgot to give us, Lila said. I looked down into the top box. It was full of untouched pastries from the brunch, wrapped in hotel napkins and stacked carefully so they would not crush. Beside them were the student programs that had never made it to the tables. Lila swallowed. We don't want them wasted, and we don't want them used for tomorrow like nothing happened. Brent said her name in a warning voice, as if he had earned the right to use it. Lila did not look at him. She looked at me. If people are coming here tonight, let them come, but feed them from your counter, not their story. The sentence landed in me strangely, not like advice, not like rescue. Like a door I had been standing beside without seeing the handle. I did not have to hide in the kitchen while my parents performed outside. I did not have to turn the bakery into a courtroom either. I had ovens, tables, coffee, hungry students, angry regulars who knew my bread better than my father knew my schedule. I had a place that could speak in a language my family could not polish fast enough. I turned to Tess. She was already reaching for clean trays. Mrs. Alvarez took off her coat and hung it on the back of a chair like she had decided to stay. Brent stared at all of us, thrown by the sudden shift from confrontation to work. I picked up the gold sign, carried it to the office, and put it behind the door where no one entering could see it. Then I came back out and tied on a clean apron. My hands were shaking, but they knew the knot. Open the case, I told Tess. Make coffee. Put the hotel pastries on the side table, labels off. Lila, if your friends want to stay, they can help or they can sit, but nobody has to perform for anyone tonight. Brent stepped forward. June, this is insane. I looked at him over the counter, with flour on my sleeve and the front door unlocked behind me. No, I said, this is service. Outside, headlights turned onto our block, slow and glossy, one after another. My father's car stopped at the curb first. My mother got out carefully, already smiling for whoever followed her. Inside the bakery, Tess slid the pastry case open with a clean metal click, and I watched my parents see the lights on, the students seated, Mrs. Alvarez at the front table, and me standing behind my own counter. The bell over my front door rang while the gold sign sat hidden behind the office door, and my mother walked in smiling like she owned the room. Behind her came my father, 2 couples from the brunch, and a woman in a cream suit I had only ever seen beside donation tables. Brent stayed near the kitchen doorway, no longer carrying my key, which somehow made him look more exposed than before. Everyone paused at once, because the bakery did not look like a private preview anymore. The rental napkins were stacked beside paper boats. The expensive flowers had been moved into empty flower tins. Lila and the students were sitting at the long table with slices of cake on saucers, and Tess was writing fresh coffee prices on the chalkboard with hands that no longer shook. My mother's smile held, but only because she had trained it to survive almost anything. June, she said, bright and sharp, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. She turned slightly, letting the guests hear her calm before they heard my answer. This was meant to be a family preview. I wiped powdered sugar from my thumb and stepped out from behind the counter. That small movement changed the room more than I expected. I had spent years using that counter as a shield. My mother had spent years treating it like a stage. Now I stood in the narrow strip between her group and Lila's table, with the bakery warm behind me and the cold air still coming in around the guests' coats. "There was a misunderstanding," I said. "Brent thought he could use my key." Brent's face tightened, but I did not look at him yet. I looked at the guests, because that was who my mother had brought as scenery. He thought he could come into my bakery after hours, measure my walls, hang a sign, and call it a preview before I agreed to anything. One of the couples glanced toward the office, where the edge of the gold sign showed behind the half-open door. My mother's eyes flicked to it too, and for the first time all day, she looked irritated by an object she had not placed herself. Howard stepped forward like he could close a drawer. "This is not the time." His voice was low enough to sound private and loud enough to warn me. "We can talk in the back." I almost laughed, because the back was where I used to be sent when I embarrassed them. The back was where I had cried into dish towels after smiling through luncheons. The back was where I had learned that my pain was always too messy for the room it happened in. But this time I stayed where everyone could see me. "No," I said. "We can talk here. This is where you brought them." Brent moved beside my father, smooth as ever. He had taken off his coat, as if staying long enough would make him legitimate. "June, this got out of hand," he said. "But nobody is trying to hurt you. We were trying to save what you built before you ran off to Seattle and left Tess scrambling." Tess stopped writing. Her chalk made a small broken line across the board. That line hit me harder than Brent's words, because he had aimed at the one place I still felt guilty. He knew I could survive an insult. He knew I could survive being called ungrateful. But Tess's future was the soft spot he had found, and he pressed it in front of everyone. Before I could answer, Tess set the chalk down and turned around. Her cheeks were red, but her voice came out clear. "Don't use me." The room went still in a different way. Not shocked exactly. More like everyone had heard a chair scrape in a church. Tess looked at Brent first, then at my father. "You offered me a job if I helped keep June calm. You told me I could be practical, but you never asked me what I wanted." Brent's mouth opened, and Tess cut him off with the smallest shake of her head. "I want to work here when no one is lying about what here is." That sentence did something my anger could not. It made the bakery simple. Not small. Simple. A place with ovens, rent, payroll, tired feet, regulars, burned fingers, and people who knew the difference between help and ownership. Mrs. Alvarez came in behind the last guest with a locksmith carrying a battered metal toolbox. She did not make an announcement. She just pointed him toward the side door, then came to stand beside me. My father watched the locksmith kneel near the lock, and I saw him understand that the night had moved past persuasion. Some power had left his hands quietly, without asking permission. My mother's smile finally broke. "June, this is humiliating." There it was. Not wrong, not dangerous, not cruel. Humiliating. That was the crime she could name. Lila pushed her chair back, and I thought she was going to defend me, but she did something better. She picked up a stack of clean saucers and carried them to the counter. "Where do you want these?" she asked me. A normal question, asked in a room full of people pretending this was not normal. I pointed to the pastry case. "There." Another student stood and gathered forks. One of the brunch guests, the woman in the cream suit, watched them for a second, then took off her gloves. "I can pour coffee," she said, almost embarrassed by herself. My mother stared at the woman as if she had defected. "Eleanor," she said softly. Eleanor did not look back. She came behind the counter only far enough for Tess to hand her the coffee urn. Tess gave her a quick lesson in 2 sentences, and the woman listened like instructions mattered more than status. That was when I felt the room tilt. Not toward me as a victim. Not toward my mother as hostess. Toward the work. Toward cups being filled, plates being passed, chairs being pulled close because people needed somewhere to sit. Brent saw it too. He crossed to me and lowered his voice. "If you do this, there is no clean way back." I looked at his hand, the same hand that had held my spare key like a harmless mistake. "Back to what?" I asked. "You deciding my future before I get there?" His expression hardened. For 1 second, the polished concern disappeared, and I saw how angry he was that I had made him visible without begging him first. "You accepted Seattle," he said. "You were leaving anyway." "Yes," I said. "I accepted." My father's head snapped toward me. My mother went completely still. Brent had meant to use Seattle as proof that I was abandoning the bakery, but hearing it out loud in my own voice made it mine again. I accepted because I want a life where my hands make something that isn't always being used to decorate your story. I turned toward Tess then, because she deserved to hear the next part before anyone else did. And if I go, I'm not handing this place to Brent. I'm not handing it to my parents. I'm going to make a plan with you, Mrs. Alvarez, and the people who actually work here. Tess blinked fast. Mrs. Alvarez said nothing, but she gave one short nod. It was not approval the way my parents gave approval, like a treat. It was recognition. My father let out a hard breath. You are making promises you cannot afford. He took one step closer, and the old part of me wanted to shrink before he even finished speaking. You think rent, wages, suppliers, repairs, and your little Seattle dream will pay for themselves because a few children ate cake in your shop? Lila's fork stopped against her plate. The students went quiet. I felt heat rise in my throat, but I did not spend it defending them. That was the trap. If I chased every insult, my father would control the room again. So I walked to the office, picked up Brent's gold sign, and set it upright on the counter, where everyone could read it. Our two last names shone under the bakery lights like a decision made without me. Then I turned it around and slid it toward Brent. Take it, I said. He did not move. My mother whispered, June. This time, her voice had no audience in it. It was just fear, and that almost worked on me. Almost. I tapped the gold sign once with my flour-dusted finger. There is no engagement. There is no preview. There is no next step. There is only my answer, and my answer is no. For a moment, nobody breathed loudly enough to hear. Then the locksmith's drill started at the side door, harsh and ordinary, and the sound cut through all the beautiful silence my family had tried to keep. My father looked at the sign, then at me. His face changed into something colder than anger. Then listen carefully, he said. If you choose this room over your family tonight, do not come tomorrow expecting anything from us. He let the threat sit in the bakery like smoke. My mother did not soften it. Brent did not deny it. Behind me, Tess put one hand on the counter, steadying herself, and I knew the next words would decide more than whether the bakery survived the night. For most of my life, my father's threats had sounded like weather. They filled the room, and everyone adjusted. My mother would go quiet. I would apologize. Some invisible roof would lower over my head until I said whatever made them proud again. But that night, his sentence landed on the counter beside Brent's gold sign, and stayed there, small enough to look at. If you choose this room over your family. I looked around the bakery, Tess beside the register, Leela at the long table, Mrs. Alvarez near the locksmith, Eleanor holding a coffee urn like she had just remembered her hands could be useful, students with paper plates, donors who had arrived expecting a private unveiling and found a working room instead. My father wanted the choice to sound impossible. Blood or bakery, family or failure, him or nothing. I picked up the next order ticket from the printer, because the machine had not stopped just because my father was angry. Order for Maya, I called. A girl in a green cardigan lifted her hand. I boxed her pastry, passed it across the counter, and only then looked back at him. If this place fails, I said, it fails as mine. He waited for more. I did not give him more. That was new too. My mother made a small, wounded sound, the kind that used to pull me across any room. This time no one rushed to repair her. Brent tried one last door. He turned to Tess. You don't have to tie yourself to this, he said. The offer still stands. Tess did not look at me for permission. That mattered more than I can explain. She leaned both hands on the counter and said, I already have a job, and my boss doesn't need a fiancé to translate her. A short laugh broke from someone near the window. Brent's mouth tightened. For a second I saw the bargain he had counted on. My fear, Tess's rent, my parents' audience, his key. None of it opened for him anymore. The locksmith's drill moved to the front door, sharp and ugly over the hiss of milk. Every head turned toward the sound. Mrs. Alvarez raised her voice just enough. New locks tonight, she said. Only June gets the first key. My father's face darkened. This is unnecessary. Mrs. Alvarez looked at him with no interest in being liked. A man entered my tenant's business after hours without permission. It is necessary. She did not argue after that. She just turned back to the door, and the drill bit into metal again. That sound did something no speech could have done. It made the change physical. My mother came around the side of the line and gripped the edge of the counter. "You are embarrassing us," she whispered. Her perfume hit me before the words did. Same perfume as birthdays where I had been corrected before cake. Same perfume as school nights when my father made my report cards about his reputation. I could have answered all of that. I could have dragged every old hurt into the bakery and made the room watch. But that would have kept me inside their weather. I set a paper cup under the espresso machine and said, "No, Mom, I'm serving customers." She flinched like I had slapped her. My father looked at the donors, searching for someone to hand the room back to him. But the donors were reading the menu board, stirring coffee, pretending not to know how to rescue him. A woman in a pearl gray coat stepped fully into the line. "I'll have whatever she's having," she said, nodding at Lila's plate. Tess met my eyes once, quick and fierce, then rang her up like it was the most normal thing in the world. Another donor followed. Then one of the men who had come in with my parents took off his scarf and asked if we had decaf. The private preview broke apart one ordinary order at a time. Lila stood from her table. She had taken off her heels and tucked them under her chair, and without them she looked younger, but not smaller. "Mr. Mercer," she said to my father, "my friends and I came here because June fed us when your hotel table didn't." My father gave her the polite nothing face he saved, for people he considered temporary. "This is a family matter," he said. Lila looked around at the crowded room. "It doesn't look like one." That was the moment people stopped waiting for him to explain the room to them. No one clapped. No one made it dramatic. They simply kept ordering, pouring, carrying, sitting. Work moved around him, and because it moved without his permission, he looked smaller inside it. Brent picked up his coat from the chair near the door. He looked at the gold sign on the counter, then at me, as if there should have been one more sentence that made me doubt myself. There wasn't. "June," he said, low. I waited. He had nothing after my name. He took the sign under one arm, awkwardly, because it was too wide to carry with dignity. When the bell over the door rang behind him, I felt nothing dramatic. I felt tired down to my bones, and under the tiredness, I felt space. My father moved close to me, so close I could see the tiny nick on his cheek from shaving. "Do not come to us tomorrow," he said. "Not for money, not for help, not when Seattle gets hard, not when this little place eats you alive." There it was, clean at last. Not worry, not guidance. A threat dressed as prophecy. I wiped my hands on my apron. "I heard you." He blinked. I think he expected an argument. He expected me to defend the bakery, defend Seattle, defend Tess, defend the students, defend the shape of my own life, until he could find one weak seam and pull. But I did not defend. I rang up a coffee. I handed Eleanor a stack of lids. I told Lila where the extra napkins were. I let my father stand in a room that no longer stopped for him. My mother looked at me one last time, waiting for me to soften. I looked back, not cruelly, not gently, just steadily. She touched my father's sleeve. He opened the door, and they left without ordering a thing. The locksmith finished, while the evening rush was still moving. Mrs. Alvarez tested the new deadbolt twice, then came behind the counter and placed one brass key on my open palm. "For you," she said. "Copies only if you ask." I closed my fingers around it. By the time the last donor left, the pastry case was almost empty. Tess wrote tomorrow's prep list on the back of one of the abandoned preview programs, and Lila stacked chairs without being asked. Mrs. Alvarez took the gold sign from where Brent had forgotten it by the door and slid it into the trunk of her car because she said she knew a man who could melt down bad ideas. I kept one curled shaving of brass from the new lock in a small white bakery box under the counter, not because I needed a souvenir, but because I was done letting other people decide what counted as mine to handle. Later, after Tess locked the register and hugged me hard enough to hurt, I stood alone by the front door and turned the new key once from the inside. A single curl of brass from the fresh-cut lock was still stuck in the flower on my thumb. Tomorrow, I would call Mara from Seattle. Tomorrow, I would answer Mrs. Alvarez about the lease. Tomorrow, I would learn what a life looked like when no one else got the first key. But that night, I stood in my own bakery, under my own light, and listened to the lock hold.